Like Scott said, we tasked our data coordinators with this idea of tracking our 2 or more year students. So we have this lovely tool now that we lovingly call the Tommy, 2 or more years. And so our Tommy tracker is splitting out those students who have that specific longevity with us. So what you're looking at here is just some quick snips. We're still fine-tuning this tool, so I do want to give that caveat that the data is still rolling in and formulas are still being tweaked to make sure that we have checked and cross-checked. This is a tool that only admin has seen so far. We'll be releasing it to our teachers in second semester. So one of the things that we are doing with this tool, however, is in data meetings, teachers have been targeting specific students that were what we call bubble students that we could move up those levels in the ACT Aspire. So we are asking them to also identify those students on their target list that are 2 or more year. So then second semester, we will have their target list be completely our 2 or more year students so that our teachers have a very close eye on those students. So what this tracker does, as you can see here, is it basically starts to figure some growth patterns for us for these students. So we have the percent of students that were proficient in 16-17. This is the percent of students that would be in one of those top 2 tiers in the ACT Aspire. And then we tracked their Q1 average grade, and then whole group class connect attendance, target attendance, and exit ticket proficiency. Now you'll see some of the data, like this 1%, is perhaps a little bit disconcerting. Those are areas where we know that we're relying on our teachers' use of the Big Teacher Workbook. If you're familiar with that, excuse me, that tool that we utilize. And so this is also going to help us to help teachers understand how important that reporting tool is, especially as we work towards our charter renewal in 20. So this sort of data to be able to track our 2 or more year students is really going to be helpful. So then what the idea is overall, the tracker has multiple tabs and screens, ways that we can slice and dice these students. But ultimately what it will provide for us is a growth measure for grade and proficiency over the years, so that we'll be able to track what growth or loss we experience with those students individually. So this is just a quick snip of the elementary. We have tracked math, ELA, and science. We're trying to stay a little bit ahead of the curve there. While math and ELA are the only subjects that are addressed in our charter goal, we do know that because of the ACT Aspire pulling in science as a testing area, that's likely an area that we would need to show some evidence for. So we wanted to be proactive and include that as well. So right now for the Tommy is as it sits, it still needs a little bit of cleanup, but we are showing a 1% growth in math from Q1 to Q2, an ELA growth of 4%. Again, that's that year-over-year mark. And then others year-over-year students, and then the science grade growth of a positive 5%. Just a little bit different story in elementary, as you all know, because of the progress, completion pulling into the grade differently than the teacher graded items. So we'll see this look a little bit different for the other school levels. But we're excited about this tool. We think it's going to be really helpful as we work to meet this charter goal. Yes, Amber, go right ahead. You can jump in.
Good morning, Miss Amy. Could you go back to that slide real quick for me? Thank you. I love this new Tommy tool that you have. And you kind of hit on my question with the grade, but my question is, if you have, looking at that top chart, if you've got your students less than 50% proficient or 51 for math, but they're all getting A's in the, as far as their grade. It's based on that completion part, I know, but what percentage are you guys using for that grade as far as, is completion the only thing that you're using for that grade, or can you share a little bit about what you're using teacher graded components for that?
Absolutely. So it is a conglomeration. It is mostly progress. I mean, that's the larger piece of it, but we do pull in a teacher-graded element, and I can pull those percentages for you all. If I tried to quote them off the top of my head, it would be not good. Between the three schools, I would probably pull somebody else's percentage. I don't think it's quite that high. I want to say it's 75%, Amber, but again, I can absolutely pull that information for you as far as what that grading scale is. The other 25%, if we're going with the fact that my memory would be anywhere near correct, is a teacher grade. So it's based on their assessments, the completion of their STAR assessments and interim assessments. So there's some other factors that do feed into that, but you do make a really good point, and that was the thing that sort of stuck out for me in looking at this too, is thinking about how those grades sort of match up with what we're seeing on the summative, because there is a gap there, and we're going to see in some of the future slides a very similar gap between the information we're getting from interims and the information that we see on the summative. So for us right now, it's about closing those gaps and creating fidelity in all of those reporting areas. Yes, so some completion, some proficiency. I'm not convinced that we have that ratio completely correct. But it is something that we continue to evaluate each year as far as how those grades are tabulated. But it's a hugely valid point, and it's one that we discussed quite a bit with the idea of the progress and the completion, and how do we know, completed doesn't necessarily mean mastered, it doesn't necessarily mean proficient. So how do we tighten sort of that gap between completion and proficiency? I wish I had a really great answer. I don't. It's one of those things that we do look at and evaluate each year. Our teachers are doing, especially at the elementary, I think a very fantastic job of getting students into Class Connects and evaluating them, quote unquote, face to face, so that they can hear students read, they can watch students, sort of toil with mathematical concepts and really see the thinking and the proficiency behind those things. So I think we're getting there, but we're certainly not solid. Those two sort of outputs don't necessarily coincide with the fidelity we would hope. That probably, I don't know if that answered your question, Amber, but.
It did, thank you. I know you guys are always looking for different ways of checking students and checking their growth, and so I appreciate that, and I appreciate this view. So we can see that maybe completion, that another look needs to be taken for grades as far as completion. So thank you for sharing that.
Go ahead, Karen. I see your hand.
Hey, Amy. I would just make note, and I think you and Scott are probably both aware of this, even though I think we're very aware that progress and completion within the OLS does not always equate to performance on state tests or even equate to proficiency on our benchmarks and interims. What it really has tracked out and shown us over the last several years is that those students that tend to fall behind in completion and staying on track in the OLS are those that oftentimes withdraw. So when I look at completion and grades and stuff for the OLS, to me that tracks towards stability of the student population more than tracking toward performance on state tests. I mean, I look a lot more towards your interims and your benchmarks and stuff like that. but definitely there's a correlation between what's happening in the online school and the grade that occurs there and their stability within the school.
Absolutely, and that's actually, I love that you mentioned that, Karen, because it's actually the focus for the elementary for our upcoming Data Week in December. They're going to be using our persistence tracker, which I know you've gotten to see, and looking at sort of those indicators that are consistent for elementary students that sort of predict withdrawal. And they're going to be identifying those predictors in their current student lists and reaching out to those students that have those certain predictors for withdrawal. So basically spending their data week digging into persistence information, because we do feel exactly like you said that if a student is falling behind, that is a predictor, and how do we stand in that gap? So they're going to be digging into all of those sort of identified predictors for withdrawal and making contact with those families and setting up plans to help them feel successful. So that's a huge subject of, especially for the elementary in the upcoming data week. So I agree totally with that. So making all those things play together nicely is sort of the magic bean that we're always looking for. So we'll let you know if we find it. But definitely we're excited about the persistence tracker and what it's teaching us about being able to head off some of those withdrawals. So we'll be happy to report back and let you know. We'll track who we contact and what our action steps were, and we'll be happy to report back to you how that went.